Welcome to Dark Minds, Shattered Lives, where we expose predators, dive into the minds of evildoers, and help you and your loved ones avoid them. I'm your host, Deborah Dobbs. I'm an author and victim advocate with a reputation for rattling cages. This is episode 8 of Dark Minds, Shattered Lives. We're going to dive into the crimes that were committed by a horrific predator named Stanley Ledbetter. Doug Deaton is joining me, and if you don't know who Doug Deaton is, you should. If you didn't listen to episode 7, I would go back and do that, because you'll gain an appreciation for Doug Deaton and his wisdom and his experience that comes with it. As you may have heard, Stanley Ledbetter's crimes are horrific, and I don't usually give trigger warnings, but in order to show you what type of predator this guy is and the lack of empathy and remorse that he shows, it's going to get pretty ugly. If any kind of sexual violence deeply disturbs you and it's one of your, quote, triggers, this is not going to be the episode you want to hear. And the discussion of any of these details, it's not to be voyeuristic. It's not for shock value. It's to show you, first of all, that these people exist. Because a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their heads around the fact that there are people who behave this badly. It's not in the movies. It's not just restricted to horror movies. But it's also for people's protection. Knowledge, in this case, really is power. The best way not to be preyed upon by people like Stanley Ledbetter is to avoid them altogether, and to avoid them, you have to understand them. Although I can't say I will ever understand the mind and the way a predator like Stanley Ledbetter thinks, there are some measures you can take to avoid being victimized by people like this. Although with this guy, it's difficult. So we're going to talk about not only Stanley Ledbetter, but we'll also lead into another example and some discussion on how you avoid these people and what do you do if you are faced with one, if you fall into the grasp of a predator of this sort.
Stanley Ledbetter. He was a well-spoken, articulate guy, originally from Muskogee, Oklahoma, moved down to the Dallas area, became a tax preparation specialist, and was apparently pretty good at that, regular dude. But he was committing home invasion, robberies, rapes, that kind of thing, hunting human beings up and down the Dallas North Tollway corridor. So all the way from the city of Dallas, all the way up into the city of Frisco, and everything in between. So we had multiple offenses committed by him in the city of Plano, as well as, again, cities to our south, cities to the north. They got bad enough that I won't call it a task force, but we put together, all the cities got together and put together a working group to work on all these different offenses. It was very troubling for a lot of residents, obviously. It was deeply troubling for a lot of the cops out there. We had somebody that was raping women inside their homes, oftentimes in front of their husbands, forcing people to take him to the ATM machine and empty out the ATM. Then he would make them take him back to the apartment, where he would then take his time and rape them very violently. And his behavior began to escalate. I remember he did shoot and kill one older man. And then, of course, there's a story in that news story where he stabbed that woman multiple times. He thought that she had died, but she actually played dead after he had stabbed her repeatedly. That's the only reason that she survived, because she played dead.
The woman was watching TV at like 2 a.m. She's in her PJs, and she described it like an explosion through her sliding glass door. Is that what happened?
Right. Yeah. He was actually very methodical about the way that he would break into places. He would target people based on the locations of their apartments within the actual apartment. He mostly stuck to apartment buildings. I also want to say, for anybody listening, I'm not taking any credit for any of these cases. I had very small roles in all of them, very small on this one especially. At this time, my entire involvement in this is because I was on the SWAT team, and we were sent out to go hunt him, to go find him and figured this out, and to literally sent out in 2- and 3-man elements to go hunt whoever it was that was hunting people.
So at night, you go out?
Yeah. And so I was not part of the group that ultimately captured him. My friends were. My co-workers were. It just so happened in that day.
Did you figure out who he's targeting?
Mostly targeted women, and sometimes couples.
Yeah. And he had a shotgun.
Yes, he did. He had a shotgun, sawed off, cut down a little bit.
Because if somebody has a pistol, like if you're not terrified of guns, there's a high survival rate. You know, if you're shot with a pistol.
There is.
Not with a shotgun. I mean, if somebody's got a shotgun to your head or your gut, you're done.
Correct.
And so I think some people say that, like, well, I wouldn't comply. You're going to die probably if you don't. I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. He was definitely opportunistic. And I use the word hunter in its true sense of the word because, again, he was methodical. He would stake out an area, look at an area, kind of sort of patrolling it, looking for people who had lights on late at night in corner apartments where there was easily accessible, where they were easily accessible through a sliding glass window or, you know, I wouldn't call it a balcony, but just a little, how apartments have a little patio area that he could access that quickly on foot, usually from an unlit area into the lit area. And sometimes also capture people right in those transitional moments when they're fumbling with all their stuff and they're not paying attention. All of a sudden now here's a guy with a shotgun standing there pointing it at, literally with his muzzle pressed into your gut.
Where were they fumbling with stuff?
Well, you know, there's stuff at the door trying to get into their own.
Okay.
Yeah, so late night stuff, things like that. So pretty cautious about who he would select.
Did he say the lights were on?
Yeah, he would go around and look and go kind of prowling around, patrol. I use the word patrolling, but you know, hunting. You know, looking in all these different apartment complexes. So that's another thing to keep in mind. These are apartment complexes that he could access easily. So not your typical gated kind of places, but places that he could easily get into on foot or in a vehicle. But he would. My understanding is, if I remember from the interviews, the post-arrest interviews, which he didn't give a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of details away, but one of the main indicators he was looking at is that the interior lights were still on really late at night. So people are up, they're there. So
why did he want them up?
I have a theory on that. Again, I'm not the case detective on it, so I don't want to misspeak on this, but my belief is that he derived a great deal of pleasure from terrifying people and especially sexually assaulting women in the presence of their husband with a shotgun. I told you that story.
Yeah. This is a whiskey conversation because this is horrific, but it shows the complete lack of empathy.
Yes.
And so go ahead and explain that.
Sure. So one that occurred in our city, he got to a married couple, man and a woman, and held the shotgun on the woman, had the man and the woman sit down on the same couch so he could hold the shotgun on her and then also easily transition it over to the man. And then he forced the woman to perform oral sex on him while he held the shotgun on her and or the husband. He was able to have an orgasm while that occurred. And then when he was done, he then made the woman go into the kitchen area of the apartment. And then he set his watch and forced her to wash her mouth out repeatedly at the sink for 15 minutes straight. And he did. He timed it and made her vigorously wash her mouth out at the sink. Continue big gulps of water, swish it around, spit it out. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. And the whole time the husband's sitting there watching this. And when he was done, he just left.
He didn't kill them.
He didn't kill them. So he didn't kill a lot of the people that he victimized. He escalated that along the way. His violence definitely escalated. So moved from, again, remember he stabbed the one lady repeatedly. That was in the news story that I shared with you. There was an older man that was apparently non-compliant, tried to get away, ended up shooting him with a shotgun, killed that guy. So it's, again, an opportunistic predator. I would liken I'm not exaggerating here. I would liken him to sort of like a tiger, an opportunistic predator that's looking, sniffing, checking, probing, always looking around, walking around quietly, watching and observing, because that's exactly what he was. And he's not unique in that
right.
respect. He's a great classic example of that type of predatory guy. And the other thing about him that really struck all of the detectives that were involved in this case was that after he was caught, he didn't seem to be even remotely worried, concerned, upset at all. Most of your listeners would probably be pretty upset if they found out they had a traffic ticket. That outstanding, had a traffic ticket they forgot to pay or something and went to a warrant. They get pulled over for some, minor offense, whatever, failed the signal. Oh, hey, Mrs. Dobbs, you have a warrant for your arrest. I'm sorry, we're going to have to take you to jail. Most people would have a borderline panic attack over that. you know.
Mhm.
People get upset about the idea of being handcuffed and taken to jail, even over very minor things.
Yeah.
This is a guy, again, I won't go so far as to call him a white-collar guy, but yeah, kind of. I mean, a tax preparation specialist. You know,
That's white collar.
that's white-collar, you know.
Yeah.
He didn't really come across as that, but he's got a good job doing, you know, paperwork stuff in an air-conditioned environment. He's certainly not some rough outdoor, you know, construction work kind of guy.
You wouldn't look at that guy and go, yeah, he'd handle himself fine in jail, but he would. He just wouldn't know it.
Yeah, but
He didn't look the part.
But he, no fear at all. And on the day of his arrest, they actually caught him. I forget where they caught him exactly. I want to say it was over closer to Fort Worth. They caught him in a barbecue joint.
He left like his shotgun shell bag behind. Is that the guy?
Yeah, that's the guy. So
That shocked me that he forgot
that's
that.
sloppy. That's actually very, very sloppy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he left behind, it's sort of one of those slings. Some people might refer to him as like a bandolier type thing.
Okay.
So it has multiple spaces on it where shotgun shells fit into it. And he actually left that behind at a crime scene.
And his DNA was on it.
Correct.
That stunned me that he did that.
Especially considering this is the same guy that made one of his victims wash her mouth out for 15 minutes.
Yes.
So he clearly understood the importance of DNA.
Yeah.
So he made a mistake there. I don't know why he made that mistake.
I'm glad.
Remember.
I'm glad he made a mistake.
But he was not even remotely worried, upset. I mean, it'd be just like no big deal.
Did he deny it?
He didn't really talk a whole lot. But the first detective they sent that went in there, because it happened to be the detective that was on call at the time. And, you know, I don't mind saying this. The guy doesn't work there anymore. And, you know, it's a known issue. But this detective was sort of a smaller guy, looked very, very young for his age, and kind of boyish looking, you know, slotted build, smaller individual. So, you know, not your typical, you know, WWE, you know, wrestler.
Wasn't intimidating anybody.
Yeah, but he went in there, a professional guy, but so he went in there to interview Ledbetter. And they said that was the first and only time that Ledbetter ever gave off any hint of emotion or human reaction. Before that, they said he had just been ice cold, zero affect, facial expression very neutral, speaking in very, very monotone responses, but unconcerned. And he was entertained by this detective that came in to talk to him. And they said he actually kind of smirked and then actually laughed a little bit. He said, they said, "You in here to interview me?" Okay. And it actually started laughing out loud. And that was the only time they said that he ever showed any actual emotion about anything.
How'd the interview go? Do you remember?
There was no interview. He didn't. No. He was just like, what are you doing? Why are you even talking to me? So he didn't have anything to say. You know, I do remember that because I was a sergeant though at the time. And so, you know, I was in some of those meetings where, you know, that working group, and that was people from Dallas PD. I mean, if you look at the North Dallas Tollway, start in effectively downtown Dallas on a map and follow it all the way north to Frisco. Every single agency, every single city that you see along there, they were involved. And the Texas Rangers were also involved. And so there was a lot of people in the room. And I remember in my opinion, the two standouts, the two probably most impressive people in the room. When they started talking, you realize, oh, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. Was the Texas Ranger, who was dressed perfectly, crisp. And then the other guy was dressed in an extremely ill-fitting suit, a little slovenly, you might say, but it was the Dallas PD detective. But you could just tell he was almost like out of central casting. I mean, you know, the guy with the bad suit, you know.
3 divorces.
Yeah.
Chain smoke.
Yeah.
Drinks.
Middle-aged guy, you know, kind of paunchy. But when he started talking, he realized, okay, this guy is experienced. He's articulate. He's intelligent. He's very professional. He knows exactly what he's talking about. And those two had some great input about the level of work that it was going to require to catch this guy. And so, I mean, we had a special tip line, a 24-hour tip line that had been started. We had, we had us out there trying to find, we were trying to find other places that had the same characteristics as previous crime scenes, and then hoping that we could catch him, catch somebody. And it just as a side note, one thing that really struck me, again, this is in Plano, along the North Dallas Tollway corridor. So that's in the nicer part of the town,
right?
Nicer part of the city, right? And we're out there at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning trying to hunt this guy. And what really struck me was how many other criminals that we found along the way
Okay.
that were not him, that were unrelated in every respect. You're like, hey, what are you doing out here? And they're like, well, what are you asking me for? Well, I want to know what you're doing out here in the greenbelt of this apartment complex. Why are you in the greenbelt out here behind this apartment complex at nighttime? And you don't live here. You don't live anywhere near here. What are you doing out here? So it was, I mean, even though I was a pretty experienced guy at that point, it was still somewhat eye-opening. Like, damn, how many other stalkerish, predatory criminals are we going to run into out here? And because when you're doing this stuff in plain clothes and you're not in a marked car and you're out on foot and you're blacked out, so to speak, you're not in a patrol unit. It's very different. And so you could find some very interesting people out there in these sidewalks and, again, green belts and hiking trails and all of that. It's so that's why you see me. I talk a lot. I was raised on a ranch in West Texas originally, so I speak about human beings a lot of times in the same way that people talk about animals. I can't help it. But growing up on a ranch, coyotes were the mortal enemy, and, coyotes, bobcats, mountain lions, that kind of thing. I mentioned my grandfather, but human beings behave in very, very similar ways. Always out there, just outside the light. They can see in there where you are, but you can't see them. Coyotes do the same thing, checking the perimeter, sniffing, probing, looking. If it's not right, they back off. If it is right, they'll advance. And that's exactly what this guy was.
But then you have the humans that are the prey.
Yes.
And so I was reading some of these cases, like, I don't know what this woman's watching TV.
Yeah.
I mean, and the guy made it sound like he busted in the glass door. Was that too dramatic?
I think that's exactly what happened. Sometimes he just force it.
What the heck did she do? What could she have done?
Yeah. So that's the thing to think about, is that some of these people didn't do anything wrong.
Right. I mean, and not that it's, and I always have to be careful. It's like, I'm not victim blaming. I'm not saying you asked for it. It's just like, if you're trying to help people avoid predators like this, when I read some of these cases, I'm like, what could they have done differently?
Right. Well, I will say that some of the victims were somewhat hapless and careless and did not pay attention to their surroundings. And I don't think that some of these people understood the importance of those transitional zones. You move from your car in the parking lot to your front door at the apartment. That's when you're most vulnerable. So he exploited some of that as well.
Oh, God, you think about people with their face in their phone.
All the time. Yes.
It's so easy.
Yeah. You have an armful of groceries and you're fumbling, you're trying to get your keys.
Yeah.
And even if you have a flip phone in those days, your phone's ringing, whatever, you're talking to your wife, you're talking to your husband, trying to figure this out, trying to get your keys in. And now there's a guy standing there and he's just put a shotgun into your husband's belly. And he's like, don't make any sound, go inside.
God.
And then he's going to spend the next 4 hours in there playing.
It was 4 hours sometimes?
Hours in there.
Oh, my God.
Taking his time. And so that's,
So he had a life sentence.
yes. He's never getting out. I looked him up before I came on the show. I looked him up on the Texas Department of Criminal Justice website. He is never getting out of prison, ever.
How is that not a death penalty case?
I don't know. I don't know.
Because it's a capital crime, right?
Well, yeah.
Well, some of them.
Yeah. When he shot the older man that he shot, that wasn't a capital. It wasn't a capital murder type offense, or charge at least. The other stuff, was attempted murders and then the rapes. I'm using the word rape, but in Texas it's sexual assault. So those.
I actually use the word rape because I think sexual assault softens it.
That's why I use the word rape as well, because different audience members from different jurisdictions may not understand what that means. And I agree with you. The word sexual assault does soften the severity of the offense. And, when I told you that story, and I've told the same story to the listeners now, I'm not sharing that story to be, I don't know what the word would be, prurient or, it's because I want people to understand, if you don't think there's evil out there, what is that? Imagine a kind of person that is capable of doing that. And I'm being disgusting for a minute and just talking about it, but we can't talk about the reality of how these people think without talking about the disgusting aspects of it. The vast majority of human males wouldn't be able to achieve an orgasm without shotguns and all that involved if there's just somebody else in the room. This guy was able to do that while holding a gun on people he'd never met before. Imagine the kind of dismissive mindset that takes about what the value of these two people here
Oh, yeah.
and their relationship and their marriage. I mean, it's a violation of it's a violation of multiple levels. I mean, it's not just a violation of her and her personhood and her agency, but it's also a violation of this family unit and their marriage and their relationship. I mean, I can't even imagine. And then to have the wherewithal to stand there, time it, and make her wash her mouth out for 15 minutes. So again, the reason for that story is, and you asked earlier about what can people do when we talk about awareness, is I still think there's an awful lot of people out there who just don't believe that true evil is out there. They don't believe it, or they don't want to believe it, or they sometimes concern themselves about what happened to him to make him that way. I don't really care. It doesn't matter, okay? You don't ask that of the tiger that's trying to kill you and eat you.
Yeah.
You don't.
Yeah.
He's worried about that.
And even a tiger, they're just going to eat you. They're not going to play with, torture you for 4 hours because it's amusing to them.
Torture you and your spouse.
Yeah.
Right.
So they're not about degradation.
That's right. And that's what this guy was definitely about.
Yeah.
So again, I wasn't the primary case detective on it, but I still think it's a great example of one of these guys that really enjoys the fear involved of his victim, manipulating the victim, making them do things, promising them that they're not going to be hurt as long as they comply. And then, well, of course, then they were hurt.
Yeah.
In some way or another, So,
They were just a true sadist.
yes. Yes.
And I think people, they can't wrap their head around because they don't think that way. You don't think that way. And it's hard to imagine somebody else thinks that way.
Right.
But they do. And I think that's what you've got to get to that point where you realize not everybody thinks like you on various things. There's like this spectrum. And then there's people that are just vile.
Yes, they are.
And it's good you can't think like them, but it doesn't mean they don't exist.
That's right. Just because we don't have the capacity to think or feel or fantasize in that same way does not mean that there's not some dude living 2 miles from us who doesn't. One of the things that I tell people sometimes, and I got to tell you, Debbie, there's been some people I've told this to who had almost a visceral reaction to it. And you could see in their facial expressions, they did not approve of what I just said. And so I'll tell you the same thing. I was like, listen, I'll think of the most vile, most disgusting, bizarre, filthy, sexual, and murderous thing that you can imagine. The absolute worst thing that you can think of that one human being could do to another. I'm not talking about in a war setting. I'm not talking about in some foreign country. I'm talking about it right here in your neighborhood. If you let your imagination run free for just a moment about the worst possible thing that one human can do to another, picture that in your mind, whatever that is. I said, I promise you that within about 2 square mile area, there's somebody living in that 2 square mile area that if they had the chance to do that, they would do it with a smile on their face, and they would do it to you while your family watched. And I mean, literally the facial expression, Doug, I don't know about that. It's like, yeah, well, I do.
Yeah.
And they are out there. The only reason they haven't done it is because there are other confines on their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not because of social mores, and it's not because of morality, and it's not because they have a conscience. It's because they're concerned about being captured, being caught, or because there's just too much attention on you. But when societies fail, what we do know this, look at what happened in former Yugoslavia. When societies break down and fail, that's when those kind of people come out to play.
Yeah, it's kind of like you'll have the purge for real.
That's right. That's exactly what happens. Yes, that is precisely. And I've read different books about that. Talked about it when, in times of war and famine and societal breakdown that have occurred, those kind of people run amok because this is finally getting the opportunity to do what I've always wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. No accountability and
none. No law. Nobody's going to come get me, and nobody's going to stop you or stop me from using you for my own pleasure. And so, yeah. So those people, I don't claim to know what percentages there are. I know opinions vary.
Yeah.
What is it, 2%, 1%? Guys like Ledbetter that we're talking about, what are they? 1/4 of 1%. Okay, but just think about that. If it's 1/4 of 1%, okay, well, that means, what is that? Like out of every 400 people that you meet, there's one of them is that guy. So what if it's, okay, what if it's just 1 out of 1,000? Okay. So how many people live in your city? 1,000. So that means there's 50 of them sitting there waiting to do this if they had a chance, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's situational awareness seems like the biggest.
Yeah. Situational awareness, obviously hardening your target if you can. You know, I don't claim to know what happened with that lady's sliding glass door window, but I don't like those things at all.
No.
You know, I'm a big believer in layers of security and extra locks. Make it hard for them to get through the points of ingress.
Do you think if there had been an alarm, like an instant alarm, that would have deterred him?
I don't know. Possibly if there had been a loud alarm that would have alerted other people around, possibly so. Because his big thing was taking his time with him once he was inside.
How can you install the layers that you need?
Yeah. Well, one of the first things I would recommend anybody do is not live in an apartment complex where there's not physical barriers between them and greenbelts.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a hiking trail behind your apartment complex and there's no physical barrier between you and that trail, I wouldn't like that. I just wouldn't. Mm-hmm. Of course, then again, I'm hyper, you know, well, frankly, I'm hypercritical, and I'm also hyper-focused. I can't help it. So I'm not, you know.
I'd be concerned if you weren't after everything that you've seen.
But I wouldn't like that. Now, keep in mind, walls don't always work. I mean, I've been to multiple robberies that I can think of where they came right through a gap in the fence, you know, that they already pre-planned. They cut out bars or whatever with that. So that's not, it's a layer. It's not the solution.
Right.
So, but yeah. So, and of course, having a force option at home is also helpful. And then I know this is way more than what we're going to cover here, but you also have to make a decision ahead of time about how compliant will you be.
Yeah.
And at what point should you go for broke, no matter how bad it is. And most professionals agree that once they get the restraints out, it's time to fight. Or once they put you in a car or try to put you and move you from one place to another, it's time to take action. And what he did and what some of these other people do, you know, other case studies have seen is that first they test you for submission, but then there's also they'll do something to make you think that they're being rational and they're actually gonna live up to their word. Don't scream, just take me to the ATM and you won't be hurt. So then they take him to the ATM, but he hasn't hurt me yet. So then okay, all right, so I'm gonna get out of this. Okay. No, you're not. And they didn't. But they thought they were going to be okay. He said, hey, just take me back to the apartment. I'll leave and go get my car, you know? Well, no.
And again, you're thinking, well, he
hasn't hurt me yet.
He's going to think like you do.
Right.
And they don't.
Because
most people in that position would never dream of sticking a shotgun in someone's side. They would never even think of that. So don't assume that this guy's going to suddenly think like you and be rational, because you never dream of doing that.
He would lay down in the back seat of the car, too, and then stick the shotgun muzzle between the seats into the side of the victim. And so he knew that he didn't need to be sitting up because he didn't want to be caught on the camera at the ATM machine, right? So can you imagine any of your listeners, you're a 30-year-old woman, you know, just still kind of getting going in your career, trying to figure things out, you know, and now you have this monster inside your and puts a shotgun in your side, makes you take him to the car, you know, at 3 a.m. And then you're driving to the drive-through ATM with a shotgun stuck between the seats. He's laying down in the back seat. Imagine the horror and the terror they must be experiencing, you know. So,
I can't even imagine it.
So most people don't have a whole lot of rational thinking going on at that point either. It's just, it becomes very primal.
Yeah.
Just worried about, okay, what's going to happen next? Okay, well, he's not. Okay, so he hadn't hurt me yet, so maybe I'm going to get out of this okay.
Yeah.
And for any of your listeners, they just need to understand at that point, you're probably not. And even if you think you are, well, that's all up to him now, isn't it? It's not up to you anymore. And so you need to take ownership of your future and don't put your future in the hands of a psychopath.
These are all hypotheticals. So a young woman, unarmed, you get in a car, he's laying in the back seat, shotgun. In a perfect scenario, what could she do?
Well, I mean, first off, there's no perfect scenario at that point. But
crash the car?
Yeah, crash the car and
run?
Have a plan to run, you know? But we had a situation, something very, very similar to that in Plano. A guy came to murder his stepdaughter. He had been a lifelong serial abuser, rapist, and he snuck into the back of her car while she was at the QT, a gas station. And similar situation, had a pistol with him though, laid down in the back seat. This is all a video. She got into the vehicle, went inside, got one of those hot dog things, QT, my God, and gets in there, and then it's him, and he'd come. And so he tells her, "You're driving me to the border." She was smart enough to know he's going to kill me. So he told her, "You just get me to the border," because he had ties in Mexico and all that.
From Plano?
Yes, from Plano
to the border.
to the border. So, 14-hour drive.
Oh, grandiose there. Right. Okay.
But she was smart enough to know that wasn't realistic.
How old was she?
She was in her 20s.
Okay.
Again, she had previous experience with this guy too, though. That's the difference. So the story, as I'm answering a question with this story.
Yes.
So she knew that's not how this is going to end. This is going to end with him killing me. And she told us that later. She knew. She's like, "That's BS. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get to the border. He was going to take me somewhere, make me drive somewhere, and then he was going to murder me, kill me, And then it turned out that's exactly what he planned to do. So she backs the car out of the parking space and hits the gas and runs it right into one of the gas pumps. And there was a police car there. A Plano police officer was getting gas at the same gas station. She jumped out of her car, the victim jumped out of her car, ran and jumped in the police car and drove off in it. Yeah. And so the police officer standing there, it's a female police officer. Yeah, female police officer. This guy had victimized women his entire life.
I think I remember this.
So, I'm not like being some third wave feminist guy here, but I still think there might have been some kind of God thing going on there.
Yeah.
This guy had abused women so horribly for his entire life that God sent a woman to punch his ticket.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so she's like, what is going on? So she goes up to the vehicle and he comes out with his 38. And so you can see on the video, she gets a pistol out. First shot, typical. Sometimes first shot went low, first shot went high. And she just locked onto that guy, filled him full of holes as she did this wonderful arc around the vehicle and killed him right there. Anyway, so long story. That's a very, very long-winded story, but the answer is you're going to have to find a time to be non-compliant, try to disrupt what's occurring, maybe crash the car,
That's that intuition, that survival instinct that kicks in instead of wondering why and trying to rationalize. You just go into survival mode. And your limbic system kicks in, but obviously she could think enough.
Yes.
Well,
she had enough experience with this guy.
Yeah.
To know how violent he was, how dangerous he was, and she just wasn't going to allow that to happen longer. But some of these other victims of this Ledbetter guy, they'd never met him before in their lives. This is the first time they've ever seen or heard of the guy, and now here he is standing in your living room.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's just terrifying. I'm glad he's been put away.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's interesting when some of these psychos later decide they're going to talk. And I think it's maybe my theory is they get bored and they like the attention.
Yes.
And they know they're screwed anyway. They're not getting out. So, okay, now I'm going to tell you.
And oftentimes it's a transactional thing.
Yeah.
Ted Bundy did some of that.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that he was saying, you could tell he was reading them better than they were reading him, where there's a lot of evidence that Ted Bundy was planning an escape. He was working out really hard and doing some tanning stuff. He may have had an escape plan before his execution, but he was one of those guys that was willing to talk to people later, but separate issue completely. But I've seen some great interviews with burglars where they're willing to speak about their techniques and tactics.
Yeah.
As they're talking, you hear their voice start to slow down and they start talking like this. And then I would go into the bedroom and you're like, oh, he's enjoying this. So it gives them an opportunity to share the story with somebody, even if it's the cops, but he's getting to relive it. Mm-hmm. He's getting some excitement. So I think you're spot on.
I went through the Plano's Citizens Police Academy and I heard Mark Dawson, I think, talk about a burglar that they got all kinds of information that was useful to residents about how he chose the houses to burglarize. And one of them was the people that they put the things out front that say my kids in, drill team or basketball.
Yeah, great.
Varsity football, when they're gone.
That's exactly right. See, we never put any of that stuff out when my kids were in school. My kids are 20, 21 now.
Yeah.
None of that. Yeah. None of that.
It's like, guess what? We're not going to be home.
You're literally putting a sign out that says, I won't be home on these nights. But to a guy like Ledbetter, you know what you're telling him there? This is when we will be coming home
Yeah.
after having been gone for a while.
Yeah.
Why would you ever advertise that?
I don't understand. We had Scaramucci, Joe Scaramucci was on about trafficking. He also talked about how these people think that the traffickers are going and kidnapping kids off the street. And he's like, they're not doing that. They're looking at your social media.
That's right.
And I've reached out to some people like, can I talk to you about what you're posting? Because it's so obvious that they want a relationship, that they've been hurt, that they've been cheated on.
Right.
And you're just giving them all this information and exposing your vulnerability, and they don't change it.
No.
They don't even want to talk about it. It's like you're broadcasting your vulnerability.
Yes. Without going into a lot of detail, I had to have a conversation about that exact topic with a family member of mine. And that old what does that say? You can't be a prophet in your own hometown.
Yep.
And it's just so frustrating sometimes. And you're just like, hey, I'm not telling you this because I'm trying to run your life. I'm telling you this because I've seen this stuff happen with my own eyes. It's not a theoretical thing. This isn't some TV show that I watched. I am the guy who took these reports. I am the guy who spoke to these victims. I was there.
Yeah.
And, but there's no, to your point, it's just like.
Yeah, you're just being paranoid. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I'm careful.
Every single victim of these psychopaths that I sent to you, almost every single one of them, if you had interviewed them 24 hours before the incident and asked them, what do you think the odds are that you'll be stabbed and raped by tomorrow night? They'll be like, that's ridiculous. I'm safe. I pay attention to what's going on. That's not going to happen to me. Well, then it did. So nobody ever wants to think it's going to happen to them,
I sit here and I always think it's going to happen. I'm almost like the opposite. I'll be watching TV and I have a pistol right there, especially if Wayne's gone. I think about the people I know somebody that had taken a bunch of drugs and they weren't even targeted. They just kicked the door off the hinges.
Some random stuff happens.
Yeah, he was crazy.
Yes.
He just lost his mind. And
so there's a significant percentage of Americans who believe that's a sign that you are paranoid. But if you ask those same people, do you have a fire extinguisher at your home? And, well, of course I do. So are you planning on an arsonist showing up tonight? No. Are you planning on doing something stupid with a grease fire in your own kitchen tonight? No. I'm not an idiot, Doug. Yeah, I know. Then why do you have a fire extinguisher in your house?
Right.
Well, because. Yeah, because.
Just in case.
Just in case that 1/4 of 1% situation occurs. You're going to feel pretty damn stupid if you don't have a fire extinguisher in your kitchen when the 1/4 of 1% thing actually does happen to you tomorrow night. So no, it doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you prepared. It's not silly. Bad things happen to good people.
Yeah, all the time.
Nobody of those airplanes that we've seen recently, the airplane crash that we saw recently, airplane travel is still by far the safest way to go statistically. And yet, sometimes bad things happen. If you'd ask all those people on that aircraft, do you think that when this thing lands, it's going to flip upside down and grind to a halt on the airstrip? Well, no. Yeah, well, the odds of that happening were pretty dang slim, but it did in fact happen. Stanley Ledbetter hunted down and raped and stabbed and shot and really hurt multiple people, none of whom deserved it, and all of whom would have said that they just never believed that they would be the random target of a psychopathic rapist and killer.
Thank you for listening to Dark Minds, Shattered Lives. I'm Deborah Dobbs, and until next time, trust your gut and know your exits.